Chapter 9 discusses the major critical perspectives on crime. Labeling theory was the first critical perspective of the 1960s and was soon followed by the various conflict theories. My name is Omid Azadi.
My name is Herberth.
My name is Shakia Howard.
Alright guys.
Labeling theory. Labeling theory has been called one of the most significant perspectives in the study of crime and deviance. It addresses three major issues. 1. The definition of crime and deviance. 2. Possible discrimination and application of official labeling and sanctions. 3. The effect of labeling on continued criminality. Labeling theory adopts a relative definition by assuming that nothing about a given behavior automatically makes it deviant. In this view, deviance is not a property of behavior, but rather the result of how others regard the behavior. In addition to defining deviance in an unusual way, labeling theory also discusses how official labeling occurs. Labeling theory says that some people and behaviors are more likely than others to be labeled deviant. In other words, people in power impose definitions of deviance on behaviors committed by people without power. It is also said that official labeling discriminates against people of color, the poor, and women. Labeling theory builds a part of the symbolic interaction approach in sociology, which states that our interaction with others shapes our conception of ourselves and affects our behavior. It also stresses that labeling someone deviant can produce a deviant self-image that prompts the person to commit more deviance. Frank Tannenbaum, a historian of crime, called this process the dramatization of evil. He said, "It plays a greater role in making the criminal than perhaps any other experience, and that a person labeled deviant becomes the thing he is described as being. In a self-fulfilling prophecy, the social, psychological, and practical consequences of official labeling thus lead to deviance amplification or the commission of continual deviance and the adoption of the deviant lifestyle." Labeling theory has certainly generated much controversy over the years, and scholars have criticized it since its inception. Several criticisms are worth knowing. First, it paints an overly passive view of the individual as quietly succumbing to the effects of the deviant label. Second, empirical research fails to support its arguments as to the influence of extra-legal factors on labeling and the effect of labeling on self-image and continued deviance. It implies that a life of crime does not develop unless official labeling first occurs. Fourth, it fails to explain primary deviance and thus ignores of family and peer relationships and more. Macro factors on deviance and crime. Radical criminologists also criticize it for ignoring the sources of the power inequalities that affect the making of laws and the likelihood of official labeling for criminal behavior.
Restorative justice, a movement that reflects ancient philosophy and has gained popularity in recent years, focuses on restoring the social bond between the offender and the community. It has been tried in some areas of the United States, along with nations such as Australia, Canada, Japan, and New Zealand. Although restorative justice practices differ, the need to reintegrate the offender back into the community is a common goal. It is a personal process that encourages offenders to own up and take responsibility through meetings between their victims and community members. A couple examples would be the victim impact panels, allowing victims to express their feelings to the offender, family group conferences involving families of the victims and offenders, sentencing circles involving offenders and victims' relatives, friends, and other associates, and lastly, citizen reparative boards that determine the conditions of probation for convicted offenders. Whether restorative justice works still remains a key question. However, victim satisfaction with the justice process has been reported, while surveys indicate participating offenders are less likely to reoffend. Turning our attention to conflict and radical theories, we take up where labeling theory leaves off. They stress the law is a key part of the struggle between the powerful controlling the powerless. These competing theories reflect a more general division in sociology between consensus and conflict perspectives. Consensus perspectives stress that social institutions help create social stability. In contrast, conflict theories say that social institutions serve the interests of the powerful in society. In capitalist societies, there are two major classes: the ruling class, who owns modern means of production, and the proletariat, who work for the ruling class. Because laws play an important role in social institutions, it was only natural for consensus and conflict views to be debated in the field. Through social movements in the 60s and 70s, a generation of scholars viewed laws as a way to repress African Americans and the justice system as a way to oppress the powerless. Through the work of earlier scholars, new scholars developed two strands of thought. The first was conflict theory, which considered laws and crime as a result of conflict among various groups in society, not just economic classes. Austin T. Turk, who wrote Criminality and Legal Order to Support Theory, developed his own theory of criminalization that proposes how criminal labels are applied. Earlier scholars who argued the powerful imposed a label of crime onto the powerless were Thorsten Selin and George Vold. Selin argued that because behavior is considered acceptable in immigrant cultures but illegal in the larger U.S. society makes many crimes immigrants commit the result of culture conflict. Vold presented group conflict theory, claiming groups with legislative power have the power to decide which behaviors will be illegal, and the crime stems from the conflict among various interest groups. The second strand of thought developed among these scholars was called radical theory. Radical theory views law and crime as a result of conflict between ruling class and the poor. Marx and Engels wrote in regards to this radical perspective, stating laws help the ruling class perspective, private property appears to provide equal justice for all. Another criminologist, William Bonger, added that cultural emphasis on altruism characterized pre-capitalist agriculturist societies. Bonger's notion that capitalism led to an economic system emphasizing competition led to a cultural emphasis on egoism, in turn making people break the law of economic gain. 4 decades after Bonger's book was published, Jerome Hall discussed in his book The Law of Theft and how the modern concept of theft developed in England some 500 years ago. William Chambliss authored a similar analysis of the development of fragrancy laws long ago, stating they were revived from time to time to benefit the mercantile class, and their purpose was to force laborers to accept low wages in order for landowners to be able to pay an affordable amount. The first radical scholars in the 1970s took an instrumental view. Recent scholars, however, seem to take a more structural view. Instrumental Marxism considers the ruling class as a small, unified group that uses the law to dominate the poor, while structural Marxism expresses the ruling class is less unified than instrumental Marxists think. Despite radical criminologists' different views, they do in fact agree on a common set of beliefs. First, a few people in capitalist societies have most of the wealth. Second, the wealthy protect their dominance through their power and the legal system. Third, the criminal law reflects the interests of the powerful. Fourth, criminals are normal people who commit crime because they are poor. Fifth, a harsh criminal justice system will not reduce crime. Finally, the criminal justice system must become more equal.
Feminist theories. Jody Miller and Christopher Muller summarize several assumptions and beliefs that distinguish feminist theories and the work of feminist scholars from traditional theories. First, crime cannot be fully understood and explained without appreciating the important role that gender plays. Second, feminist theories can and should be used to reduce gender inequality in the areas of crime and criminal justice as well as a larger society. Feminist theories all highlight women's subordinate status, but feminist scholars differ in their explanations for this status and in their recommendations to improve it. There are 5 types of feminists. First, there is the liberal feminists. They attribute gender differences in crimes and crime rates to gender differences in socialization and also call attention to gender discrimination in the criminal justice system. They advocate changes in socialization and call attention to gender discrimination in the criminal justice system. Next, there's the Marxist feminists. They say that women's subordination results from the development of capitalism, which forced women to depend on men for economic support. Women's subordination under capitalism is also thought to increase the amount of rape and other violence they suffer. Next is the radical feminists. They argue that patriarchy precedes capitalism, that gender relations are more important than class relations. Instead of viewing violence against women as a byproduct of capitalism, they see such violence as a primary means by which men in all societies maintain and extend their dominance over women. Socialist feminists consider capitalism and patriarchy equally important. Interaction of class and gender relations affects the opportunities available to people, thus both their likelihood of committing crime and being victimized by crime. Multicultural feminism considered race, ethnicity, and gender, class simultaneously. Crime by and victimization of women of color can be understood only if we consider the intersection of race, gender, and ethnicity and class. The scope of feminist theory and research. Feminist work in criminology generally addresses 4 areas. First, the victimization of women. The first feminist work in the 1970s focused mostly on victimization of women by rape and domestic violence. To bring more awareness to this subject, feminists began to document the extent of these crimes and their psychological and behavior consequences. They also stressed that women were not to blame for being victimized. A growing focus of feminist work in victimization, and one that provides a bridge to its work on criminality, is the role played by sexual abuse in girls. Boys and girls both suffer physical abuse, but girls are more likely to be sexually abused. Next, there is the gender differences in crime. Gender ratio issue, which is often called this, and seeks to understand why female rates are so lower than male rates. Structural theories do not easily explain why women who live in criminal conditions are less likely than males who live in criminal conditions to commit crime. Traditional theories of male crime seem to help explain why women and girls commit fewer crimes than men and boys. Masculinity in crime is an important focus of work, and gender ratio issue goes beyond traditional theories to focus on the nature of masculinity. The crime problem that concerns us the most is the male crime problems. But if no national crime rates were no higher than women's crime rates, then it would not concern us as much. To reduce crime, sociologists argue that male socialization and notions of masculinity must change and male dominance must be reduced. Masculinity brings with its attitude, values, and behavior that underlie a wide range of criminal activities. Next, there's the explanations of women's criminality. Often called the generalizability issue, seeking to understand such things as the gender nature of criminal behavior, the impact of gender stratification in offender networks on how crime happens, and the impact of families' gender processes on delinquency. Doing gender, the first line of inquiry of the gender nature of crime and the impact of gender stratification in offender networks, it reflects ideas that female and male offenders do gender. In 2000, Jody Miller studied robbers in St. Louis, and she found that men and women both had the same motives when committing crimes, but the way they rob and who they rob are more likely to rob is different. Miller concluded that the differences reflected a gender stratified environment in which, in the whole, men are perceived to be strong and women weak. In 2001, Miller and Scott Decker studied female gang members, and they found that gender notions of behavior and gender stratification within the gang shaped the girls' involvement in gang activities. This provides evidence that active robbers and gang members are influenced by their understanding of gender roles and stratification in the criminal networks. Power control theory is the second line of inquiry. It examines the gender process of family life that increases or decreases delinquency. Hogan and Associates came up with one of the few explanations of delinquency that highlights the roles played by both gender and class. They distinguish between patriarchal and egalitarian households. Patriarchal households is where the father works outside the home and the mother stays at the home to take care of the children. Parents are playing the traditional gender roles, and they are teaching their children these roles as well. Egalitarian households. Both parents work outside the home in positions of authority. Both sons and daughters receive less maternal supervision, and they are encouraged to be independent. This tests the power of control theory, offer mixed results. Critics fault the theory for ignoring criminologic factors such as harsh punishment and negative school experience for assuming that the mother's employment leads to delinquency. There is little evidence linking maternal employment to increased delinquency. Women in the criminal justice system. This addresses women's experience and possible gender discrimination in the criminal justice system. This discusses the experience of offenders as well as criminal justice professionals. 3 hypotheses have been developed. First, the chivalry hypothesis. This predicts that girls and women will be treated more lenient than boys and men. The evil woman hypothesis predicts the opposite of the chivalry hypothesis. Only because they believe that female criminality is so rare, a woman committing crime looks that much more terrible by comparison. The equal treatment hypothesis predicts that gender will not affect legal processing. The empirical evidence supporting these hypotheses is very inconsistent. The most recent and best designed studies find women treated somewhat more punitively for minor crimes and somewhat less punitively for serious crimes. Women are 30% less likely than men to be in prison for smaller crimes. They conclude that the effect of gender is weak compared to the effects of legally relevant variables such as prior criminal record and offense severity. Evidence exists that any chivalry shown is actually directed toward white women and not women of color.
In this chapter, we discuss critical perspectives on crime and criminal justice. Although these theories focus on the social reaction to crime represents their most distinctive contribution to criminology, they also have something to say about why crime occurs.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Once again, I am Omid Azadi.
I'm Herberth.
And I'm Shakia Howard.
Thanks, you guys.